Now, with the country now in level 1 on the lockdown, our reporter Nozintombi Miya is looking at how the relaxed regulations will assist the broader travel and tourism sector. Last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the easing of the national lockdown after almost 6 months. However, international travel for work and leisure will only be allowed from the beginning of next month. Let's cross now to her. Nozintombi, a very good morning to you. What's AXA saying this morning?
Well, a very good morning to you, Desiree. And as you can see, we are standing here inside the international arrivals at OR Tambo. And what we do know from AXA is that they're going to be implementing extremely strict hygiene protocols that will be put in place for the international travelers that will be arriving to this particular airport as from next month. But what has been quite interesting is that from the start of the lockdown up until now, the only flights that have been happening, international flights, have been the repatriation flights. And as you can see behind me, it's quite empty here at the international arrivals. And it's had a knock-down effect on some of the micro-businesses around here at the OR Tambo International Airport. And we've seen that the foreign banks, the foreign exchange banks have been shut down. The post office has been shut down, as well as some of the restaurants and the coffee shops that are on this lower level. And this has obviously also had an impact on the staffing solution from the airlines, as well as the AXA staff members. So AXA is looking towards the announcement from the Minister of Transport that's anticipated to happen on Thursday in Cape Town. And Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, will be giving a breakdown of the exact guidelines that are anticipated for when international travelers do start arriving as from the 1st of October. So there certainly is quite a bit of a wait and see, but the anticipation is that work will start beginning here at the OR Tambo, at the Cape Town International Airport, as well as the King Shaka International Airport. Desiree.
Nozintombi, have you been able to have a proper conversation with the officials about what sort of protocols they're putting in place, or is it the usual ones that we have been exposed to so far?
So the protocol have really been echoing what the president had announced, according to what AXA has said. And tentatively, the information that we've received from the Department of Transport is that all international travelers need to ensure that they have a valid passport, and all their travel documents need to be up to date and in order. All international travelers and local travelers need to ensure that they download the COVID Alert app that will assist them and also assist officials in speeding up the process of ensuring that they check their hygiene measures. And also, one of the most important elements, Desiree, has been that international travelers need to ensure that they have a negative COVID test that is valid within the past, that's not older than 72 hours. So that will be quite an interesting one to see how that regulation is implemented by AXA, by the airlines, to ensure that by the time the international travelers do arrive here at the international arrivals at OR Tambo, they do have a valid COVID negative test that is no older than 72 hours. They have a valid passport that shows that they can travel, and also ensure that they comply with obviously the normal screening measures such as the temperature check and making sure that they are hand sanitized. So AXA is going to be waiting quite eagerly. They are waiting quite eagerly for the Minister of Transport to promulgate those guidelines that will guide how international travel is expected to happen. And what's also quite interesting, Desiree, is that there's going to be a list of countries that will determine their risk factor. And obviously countries that have been put on the high risk level or the high risk list will, they won't get an opportunity to travel into the country up until they've managed to reduce their COVID infections in that particular country. And those countries that have got a low risk and a medium risk will obviously then be allowed to travel here to South Africa. And this is quite important because, South Africa is trying to minimize their international import of the COVID virus. And we do know that from the travel and tourism bodies, they've welcomed this move, and they say that it is about time now that the tourism sector, international tourism sector, starts kicking in, and we start getting those tourism, those international travelers coming into the country to restart the tourism sector that's really been affected by the lockdown. Desiree.
Nozintombi, just back to that requirement for a COVID-19 negative certificate that's 72 hours long. There's been questions around the different countries that travelers will be coming in from, and these countries have different administrative capabilities, and in some instances there won't be a possibility of test results coming out within 72 hours. Do we know what sort of conversation is going on around this?
Definitely, Desiree. We do know that, if the international travelers do come into the country and they don't have a valid COVID certificate that is no older than 72 hours, they will be taken to a mandatory quarantine facility where they will have to get tested and they will not be released from that quarantine facility up until the test comes back negative. And unfortunately, for those travelers who don't ensure that their documents are all in order, that cost of the quarantining and the COVID test will be on their own back pocket. And what the Minister of Tourism has said is that they're following the World Health Organization guidelines to ensure that they have a correct category of the countries that have been, categorized based on the risk factor. So countries that the World Health Organization has categorized as high risk, medium risk, and low risk will be the guideline that South Africa uses to accept travelers from those different countries. Now, obviously, the list of countries that that's to be put forward has not been put forward, and will only be put forward once the Minister of Transport makes his announcement on the guidelines, as well as the countries that will be put on the medium list, the low risk, and the high risk when he makes an announcement on Thursday in Cape Town, Desiree. So there certainly is quite a lot of movement happening, but by Thursday we should get greater clarity from the transport, for the people in the transport sector, as well as the workers here at AXA and in the airline sector, because the Minister of Transport will then be able to give clarity in terms of what are the guidelines in terms of the hygiene and the protocols, in addition to what the President has already announced, as well as the countries that will be put on the different category lists from high to low, and what measures will be put in place for the people who come from different countries whose standards of testing and screening is not as rigorous as South Africa's screening and testing. Obviously, they will be using the WHO guidelines, but also based on our internal experience of the spread of COVID. The different departments will be ensuring that they don't expose South Africans to unnecessary, infections from the countries that are considered high risk, or countries that don't have as rigorous testing and hygiene and protocol measures as we in South Africa have. Desiree.
Nozintombi, do we know if there is any basis to assertions that apparently BRICS countries are going to be given preference in terms of, or are going to be prioritized in terms of rolling out the opening of borders?
Desiree, obviously the BRICS countries would be one of those countries that are put on the priority list because these are some of our key trading partners. But again, the Minister of Transport is going to have to give the guidelines on which countries are the countries that will be categorized based on the risk factor. And it's going to be very tricky for the Minister of Transport to try and ensure that he does a fine balancing act, not to isolate countries countries that are some of our key trading partners, not just the BRICS countries, but also in Europe and in the US, where we've seen that those particular countries have had a really high number of COVID cases and have struggled really to get a grip on reducing their numbers of COVID. And ultimately, as much as the opening up of international borders is to help stimulate the tourism sector and kickstart the tourism sector that's been one of the most badly affected sectors in the country, the onus is also on authorities to make sure that they protect the lives of South African citizens while also opening up opportunities for those people in the tourism sector. And as I said, you can see right from behind me here at International Departures, the micro businesses in and around here have been absolutely decimated and closed off. And that means jobs. That means people who haven't had livelihoods for at least 5 months because this 2 floors, the international arrivals and the international departures, have been completely closed down. So these are the issues that the Minister of Transport will really have to think about and put down clearly and succinctly, not just to satisfy our international trading partners, but also the tourism sector, but also ensure that he satisfies the health conditions or the health regulations that are necessary, that have been put across by the Department of Health to ensure the safety of the most vulnerable citizen in South Africa. Desiree.
Thank you so much for that update. Of course, we're all counting down to that day when international travel will reopen and concerns about imported transmissions.